So today we are going to look at a very intriguing topic, and that is whether there are two criminal justice systems, one for blacks and another one for whites. And we're going to look at it in context of the Jussie Smollett cases. If you're interested in that, first of all, subscribe, like, share, but also hang around because me and my daughter slash law partner, we're going to get into it. So hang out with us. We'll be right back.
That Corbin and Corbett legal team fighting for the rights of the people. That father-daughter team investing in the youth when the system ain't treating them equal. Providing truth for our people, we able to reach them. So anytime you get accused for a crime and Lord knows you ain't do it, we here to get you through it. Exemplifying prudence and glorifying God, making sure you're compensated for other people's doings. Our vision is to be one of the best. We're small enough to focus on your matter throughout the neighborhoods of Dallas. Working constantly and making sure your rights are protected. A firm team of lawyers, aggressive, effective. A team that has your back in the courtroom. Two well-spoken black lawyers in the courtroom. Investing time and resources when it's evident that you were treated wrong. Now you walking out of Dallas courtroom with a settlement. Corbin and Corbett, the father-daughter legal tag team that has your back in the courtroom. Our purpose is simple. To obtain the favorable outcome for each client and glorify Christ in all we do.
All right, there it is. So we are back with you. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, also known as the Minister of Justice. And with me is
Attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice.
And together we are the Defiant Lawyers. We provide legal analysis of trending politics, personalities, pop culture, and politicians in politics. Yes. Oh,
yes.
Chloe, I stumbled. That's okay. Let me try it again.
Okay. This is live and unedited.
This is live. Listen, here's what I was trying to say. We together are the Defiant Lawyers. We provide legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to provide you the information you need to defy this unjust legal system. If you are interested in that, like I said earlier, go ahead and subscribe. Come on, come into the family. We're going to teach you just like you're in law school. We're going to show you. Our goal is to raise up a generation of African Americans, white Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, etc., all who are interested in achieving racial justice in this country. All right? So that's what we do. We bring you the legal news each and every week from a black perspective. So, that was a mouthful. I think I deserve a little applause right there on that one, Chloe.
You did it.
All right. Very good. What they don't know is that I have been working on this particular live show now for hours, just trying to get everything together. So, and it was our commitment today to start at 2:00, just like we announced and scheduled, 2:00, and we started at 2:00. Yay!
We did
All right. Another applause. Come on. What do you think? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. All right. But this is a very serious topic. And we're always going to have some fun, but this is a serious, heavy topic. And Legal Rebels, we do want your participation. Absolutely. All right. So we're going to talk about racism in the criminal justice system. First of all, let me say, overlook any typos or anything else that doesn't look quite right, because like I told you, I've been working hard at this all day trying to put together a top quality show. And Chloe. So and doing that while we're also having to, you know, um, be lawyers. Still got law
Yep.
situations going on this morning. But we're here and we're excited to be here. So we're going to talk about racism in the criminal justice system by analyzing the Jussie Smollett cases. And I am going to, in fact, before I throw it over to Chloe, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. I am doing great. I am very excited to be on this video today to be live with you, Dad, to discuss this very serious topic, a topic that we talk about all the time. You know, just as a family. So the conversations that we have live that we portray to our legal rebels is just something that we talk about as a family sitting around the dinner table and have throughout my entire childhood. So we're really allowing people into the type of conversations that we have as a family. So I'm excited to get into it and to talk about this because it's very important.
Very good. So why don't you then get us started with some, some context about the Jussie Smollett case or
So,
cases?
Jussie Smollett. Wow, we've covered his trial throughout the nearly 3 years that he's had these charges against him. What has been occurring has occurred, in the public eye. He's been the subject of ridicule. He got a lot of support at the very beginning when he made claims that he was attacked by MAGA supporters, and they threw some acid on him and all of that. It came out that potentially all of everything that he said may not have been entirely accurate and entirely true. And just a couple weeks ago, he was found guilty. Well, he was found guilty a couple of months ago by a jury, and he was just sentenced a couple of weeks ago by Judge Lynn. And Judge Lynn sentenced him to 5 months in jail, as well as I think a 36-month probation and some fines and court costs. And as of now, and he served 6 days of that 5 month jail term, but Jesse's lawyers filed an appeal, and a court of appeals out of Illinois decided that to allow him to be released as his appeal goes through the legal system, and before a decision is made. So as of the filming of this recording, Mr. Smollett is a free man, and he has an appeal pending in an appellate court. So basically, Jussie Smollett was charged by a grand jury with a class 4 felony for filing a false police report. And that type of offense in Illinois carries a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison.
Well, he had
And he was charged.
multiple with those multiple charges, right?
He had multiple. So he was facing multiple years in prison for those charges. I believe he had four pending felony charges for filing a false police report. um,
I believe it was five.
oh, what? Oh,
I think it was five, and,
yeah.
and each one carries 3 years, I think.
I think yes. Yep. So, he was facing a lot of time in prison, and a deal had been worked out with the state attorney and the district attorney's office where do you remember the details of the deal? I'm sorry, it's escaping me right now, but I believe if he I
Yeah,
don't remember the details.
just some community service that he had to do,
Yeah.
and he did his community service at Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push facilities. And as far as Kim Cook, I believe, who was it? No, it's Kim Fox. Pardon me. Kim Fox is the DA there in Chicago, and she worked that deal out with him. And as far as she was concerned, the case was over. But so much push came from law enforcement, the mayor's office, that they appointed a special prosecutor.
Yeah. So at the time, all of the charges were filed against Jussie were dropped. He had to do 16 hours of community service, like my dad said. He forfeited a $10,000 bond. But Kim Fox and the district attorney's office, they got a lot of pushback for that, and especially from law enforcement out of Chicago, and even the Black Chicago police chief. And so, new charges were put back on the table with Jesse, and they were pending for a couple of years until he had a trial in front of a jury of his peers, who did find that he was guilty for filing a false police report, and he was subsequently sentenced by Judge Lynn. And Judge Lynn had some pretty strong words
Yeah,
against
sure did.
Mr.
Yes.
Smollett. He didn't play. He was not playing whatsoever. He said at the sentencing hearing that Mr. Smollett's decision to maintain his innocence on the stand was an aggravating factor that led him to hand down a sentence that included jail time, more than 2 years of probation, a $25,000 fine, and more than $120,000 of restitution
Mm.
for the Chicago Police Department's investigatory efforts. So this judge was not playing. He was not playing whatsoever. And Jesse's defense team argued that he should not be incarcerated because his offense was a low level kind. It was a non-violent felony that often results in sentences of probation or community service. So that is where we're going to get into the two justice systems that my dad talked about in the intro. If Jesse Smollett was white, would he have just been put on probation or community service? That's the question. And I can resoundingly say probably so and yes, because in our practice as criminal defense attorneys, in seeing directly into this justice system that we have in the US, white defendants are treated differently and oftentimes better than black defendants. And Jesse Smollett was offered community service, the charges were dropped. But because of pressure from the police, charges were put back onto him. So I'm ready to talk about how there are two different justice systems, and whether or not, if Jesse Smollett was white, whether it would have just stayed with community service, his charges would have dropped and he would be free and able to live his life. The answer is yes, in my opinion. And the stats back that up.
Yep. We're going to look at it. Thank you so much, Chloe. Um, I would even say I'm not even sure if he would be charged, if he would have been charged, to be honest with you. I say that because I can think of so many examples of white people doing similar, even worse things. For example, here in our local community, two employees of a city, city employees, two city employees of a local town here in the DFW area, two white citizens allegedly spent over $200,000 of taxpayers' money illegally. And to this day, they have not been charged. To this day, charges were not filed against them. Okay? Now, what they did is arguably worse than what Jesse did, right? The police, what Jesse did, the jury found him guilty of, faking it and so on, and it ended up costing the city, six figures, 100, 200, 100, 120, 30, 40, $50,000. Whereas these people who has the public trust allegedly spent around $200,000, and charges haven't even been brought. That's an anecdotal example. We're going to give you even more compelling proof, but that's an anecdotal example of the two criminal justice systems in America. All right? So, Chloe, let's back up a little bit, and we're going to start with the 13th Amendment. And we're going to show the flaw in the 13th Amendment and how it has been used over the years to bring about this criminal injustice system. I'm not even going to say criminal justice, this criminal injustice system.
So in theory, it abolishes slavery, but not in practice. So slavery is still allowable and legal in this country. And a lot of people don't realize that. I think it did get into the forefront um, with the documentary The 13th that came out a few years ago. But um, whenever I tell people this, whenever I speak to clients about it, they're honestly shocked and don't realize it. So I'm glad that we're discussing it so that we can get this knowledge and information out to people as well.
Yes. I remember I was representing a young man before we started working together. And I told this young man, I said, "Are you familiar with the 13th Amendment?" And he really wasn't. He was a young cat. And I said, "Look, if you are convicted of a felony offense in this country, believe it or not, pursuant to the 13th Amendment, you once again become essentially a slave under our Constitution." And that's what the 13th Amendment literally says. Now, I'm trying to pull it up, but I was told that there is not audio when I pull it up for some reason. So let me see if I can fix that because I want to bring it up. So, Chloe, if you would talk about it a minute, give me a second to see if I can figure out the problem.
Yes. So this is what the 13th Amendment says, Section 1. It says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Think about that, guys. Why didn't the framers just say neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States? They had to add that except there. They had to add that exception clause into this amendment. And look, we know why. There was a lot of resistance to slavery even being banned. We had a civil war that tore this country apart and tore it in half. And hundreds of thousands of men and women lost their lives over the issue of slavery because some people in this country wanted to continue to enslave um, black bodies. So instead of just outlawing it and abolishing it without an exception, without a comma, the 13th Amendment says that except as a punishment for a crime and that person is duly convicted, there won't be any slavery. We're going to talk about how a lot of African Americans are falsely accused and falsely convicted. And because of those false accusations and those false and wrongful convictions, they now go back into a slave system and essentially become slaves again. So it's kind of a will of injustice that continues and continues to repeat itself. It's mind blowing.
Okay. All right. I think I figured it out. So I want us to go back and read it again with so on. All right, there it is. Sorry, you all. It's back. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been convicted, So let me explain it again. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except the exception clause means that this country can enslave people. And we're going to show you this country has enslaved people even after the 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution. Okay? So Chloe, how did I do explaining that?
I think the imagery of leaving the door wide open just shows that it slavery is not completely abolished, and a person can go back into slavery for all. And because we know of the two justice systems that are in this country, one for black people, one for white people, and the amount of African Americans who have been wrongfully convicted,
Yep.
thus entering back into slavery, it's kind of astonishing. And I would say it's by design as well.
Good. Good. So that exception clause just really leaves the door open for slavery to continue.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I told this young man that if you are convicted of a felon, you essentially become a slave under our Constitution, I never forget, he started weeping. A lot of people don't understand that. But Chloe, not only does it permit slavery, it permits all other types of criminal injustice practices short of slavery, right? And that's some of what we're getting at. So a whole lot of this stuff in the criminal justice system exists because of this door that was left wide open by the 13th Amendment. So,
Yep.
let's look at a couple other things. W.E. Du Bois. Now, let me make sure we
One of my favorites.
Yes, one of mine too. He said in his book, Black Reconstruction in America, he said the slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. Can you read this? Can you see this?
I can see it.
So what do you think? The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun. Of course, he's talking about Reconstruction, then moved back again towards slavery. Can you expound on that for us?
Yes. Man, it just it's literally a summation, a few words of what happened to black people in this country. We were freed with the Emancipation Proclamation in the 13th Amendment.
You said emancipation.
We had a few years of that's so hard for me to say, Emancipation Proclamation.
I don't mean to make fun of you on air, but go ahead.
We had a few brief years of Reconstruction where we were supposed to get our 40 acres and a mule. President Lincoln was assassinated. We had the new Jim Crow era, and something that we're still dealing with even into the modern era, and we're going to get to this with the drug war, the war on drugs that was perpetrated by both Democrat and Republican presidents. That led to the new Jim Crow, which is an excellent book written by Michelle Alexander that we're going to get into this broadcast later. So we were freed in theory. We had a brief moment in the sun, and then Jim Crow, unequal laws, discrimination, lack of access to voting, poverty, essentially led us back into slavery. And we're still feeling the effects of it now, to this day, to this very, very day.
So your mom says, wow. So if you're convicted of a felon, then you're still considered enslaved. Yes, ma'am. Under the 13th Amendment, if someone is convicted of a felon offense in this country, in fact, it's the reason why they lose the right to vote. They lose the right many different rights. It's the reason why the government can basically take rights away from them, because under the law, they have become legally a slave. And
it's one of the reasons too we fight so hard for our clients not to be convicted felons.
that's right.
We fight hard, tooth and nail, to not allow our client to become a convicted felon, because we know the importance of it, and we know that they essentially become a slave again according to the Constitution, according to the 13th Amendment.
That's right. Reverend Jerry Harper, Harper has joined us. Thank you, Reverend Harper. And he says, love the education. Thanks much. Yes, sir. We are convicted by this. We are deeply in our souls convicted by this, because, as Chloe said, we take it personal. We don't want to see anyone that we represent, but especially the descendants of slavery, be re-enslaved because of the criminal and justice system. And we're going to show you, please stay all the way with us, because we're going to show you some comments one of our former clients made after we were able to help him through this system. Please stay, because that's what this is all about. So yes, the 13th Amendment is really, in my opinion, the root of a lot of this. And so after slavery ended, you explained it so brilliantly in your video that you did last week about racial profiling. I strongly suggest you go listen to that video, you all, of Chloe. There's a longer version, shorter version. Longer version is where she and I is discussing racial profiling. Or no, it's banking while black, pardon me. And then there's the shorter version of her just going through the video talking about banking while black. And she gets into, just how the law has been used against us. Okay. And so our antagonists, our enemies, if you will, knew this clause was in the 13th Amendment, and they have used it over the years. Now, let's look at how. So shortly after slavery ended, Southern states especially created black codes. According to the Equal Justice Institution, and I hope you all can hear me. Please, please, please tell me you can hear us. Yes, I can tell you can hear us. Very good. All right. So black codes. Shortly after slavery ended, black codes were created, which are new laws that explicitly applied only to black people and subjected them to criminal prosecution for offenses such as loitering, breaking curfew, vagrancy, having weapons, not carrying proof of employment. Back then, this was shortly after slavery was abolished under the 13th Amendment. Southern states especially, and many northern states, but especially southern states, enacted and implemented these black code laws. And they then, look, let me go back to it, okay? Let's look at it again. Laws against loitering, that's just standing around. That's not really, you're not even breaking a law. You're just standing around. Breaking curfew. Vagrancy. That's just that's kind of being homeless and walking around. Having weapons. Despite the Second Amendment, we couldn't even have weapons. Not carrying proof of employment. So you were criminalized for being unemployed. And all of this was by design. The purpose of it was to get folks back into a sort of a subtle system of slavery. Douglas Blackman wrote a book, powerful book, Go out and get it. It's entitled Slavery by Another Name, where he describes after slavery how southern states especially, and northern states, but especially southern states, use these black codes to criminalize, penalize African Americans so that they can continue to wield control over black people. So again, I tie this back to the 13th Amendment, okay? Because it left the door open for all of this. We thank God that it abolished slavery on the one hand, but it left it open on the other hand. Okay?
Yeah. And I mean, it's just so it's so evil because so you have these newly free enslaved black people who are now trying to integrate into society, set up shop, provide for their families, buy into this American dream that was even back in the 19th century was being sold to the American population. And instead of continuing with reconstruction and with reconstructing the whole um, American society to integrate black people into society, you enact these black codes that were specifically designed, just like you said that for black people, and to criminalize basic behavior, loitering around outside, talking with someone outside became criminalized. Um, Being homeless. Again, these are newly freed slaves. I mean, former slaves trying to establish homes and find homes and build houses. Now that becomes criminalized. Um, Being unemployed, targeting unemployed black people who are simply trying to provide for their families. It's just very evil. And a lot of people don't realize that it continued well into even the 1900s, well into your lifetime, Dad,
We're
until
going to
it was
go ahead.
yeah,
No,
until it was a until they were overturned by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But so this continued for years and years and years and affected many generations of black people in this country.
well, since you said it happened in my generation, you just reminded me of something that I saw growing up. I'm 60 years old. I just turned 60 February last month. I grew up in North Carolina, which is a strong Confederate state. Let me tell you what I saw as a teenager. I grew up in a rural area. I mean, there were fields everywhere. I'm a country boy. And tobacco was the big crop, North Carolina. You know, you take universities like Duke University. It was built on tobacco. I don't know if people know that, but it was built on tobacco. And another university there, Wake Forest University, big donors of that university was the Reynolds family, which also dealt in tobacco. I mentioned tobacco because there were a lot of tobacco farmers. Most of them were white. There was one that members of my family used to work for in tobacco. His last name was Lawrence. I'm going to call him out. I don't care. I'm going to call him out. During that time in my lifetime as a teenager, white business owners would go to the local prison. Listen to me, Chloe. Listen to what I'm getting ready to say, because it's almost hard to believe that this happened in the 70s when I was a teenager, in the 70s. White business owners would go to the local prisons and would buy black men. 1970s. This was 100 years after slavery was supposedly abolished. I remember one man in particular. His name was John. He was an older man. I was a teenager. And Mr. John had to have been about 70 something. Mr. Lawrence went to the local prison and literally bought. I'm not talking about bought him some clothes or bought his freedom. No, he paid for him. Mr. John became Mr. Lawrence's slave.
Mm.
And he worked for Mr. Lawrence in his tobacco fields. And he treated Mr. Lawrence worse than you would a dog. I can remember him taking tobacco sticks and tobacco plants, stalks, and beat Mr. John. I was a teenager, Chloe. I saw this with my own eyes. And it bothered me so badly. I remember one time I was getting ready to jump on Mr. Lawrence. I was getting ready to jump on Lawrence. And my aunts talked me out of it. I was 13 years old. And back then, the attitude was, boy, go sit down. Stop running your mouth. Because I would tell them, why y'all letting him treat Mr. John that way? Why y'all letting that happen? And they would say, boy, shut up. Go sit down somewhere. You're going to get in trouble. Look, this fight for justice for me did not start when I became an adult. This thing has been in me a long time. God put this in me. God put this in me because it's been in me for years and years and years. And I could not get used to seeing Lawrence treat this older man, older than my father at that time, like a common slave. And that's exactly what happened. I saw that. So yes, I saw these vagrancy laws, these blight codes. I saw them in action in my lifetime as early as the 70s, 1970s.
Mm. So this white man, Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence, literally went and bought Mr. John.
He literally went and bought Mr. John.
Mm. And that goes back to, guys, why was he able to do that? Because under the 13th Amendment, a convicted felon is considered a slave. Let's just keep it 100.
We have a Facebook comment. Yes, you're absolutely right, Chloe. We have a Facebook comment that I want to talk about. Brother Barry Jenkins, good friend of mine, pastor in the area here. He says, I've worked on jobs where if you were black, you could not stand around talking to each other. But if you were white, you could talk all day.
Mm.
Those are vagrancy laws. Those they may have not been laws, but they were customs. Okay, they were customs that were and Pastor Barry and I are about the same age. Okay, so this happened basically, Chloe, in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, I take it back to the 13th Amendment, these black code laws, these vagrancy laws, loitering laws, black unemployment laws. You could be criminalized for those. And then what would happen is you would be sent to prison, and then some white person would come and buy you to work for their freedom. Claude, this was a big practice. This happened all the time. Big corporations would go to local prisons and buy black people and basically re-enslave them. I'm not making this up. This is what literally happened.
And I've seen it too, where you'll see a convoy of inmates in shackles, um, chained, working out in the field, back breaking work. And it always takes my mind back to slavery and back to our ancestors. And now it's just in a new form. Now, when just instead of being called an outright slave, okay, you're a convicted felon. So that means we can do what we want with your body.
Great point.
We can take away rights that other citizens have.
Great point.
So I always have that image in my head.
Great point.
Kind of reminds me of the movie Life. Now, Life was a comedy,
Yes,
but it had some truth to it.
that's right. That's right.
And there was a sadness underneath it. It was Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy.
That's right.
They
And
were
Bernie
falsely
Mac and
accused.
Bernie Mac
Bernie Mac.
and Anthony Anderson uh,
Yes.
and many others in that movie.
Yes. Yep. But the two main characters, Eddie Murphy, um, Martin Lawrence, falsely accused. Think of stealing something, being a robbers. I haven't seen it for years. Sent down south to a prison and
So
literally treated like slaves.
so the point we're making is if the criminal justice system started out that way and has now evolved, why would we think that it's not still currently a racist system? Was there some point in the last, because again, this was in the 70s where Lawrence went and bought Mr. John. That's what, 50 years ago? So at what point then from the 70s to now would we say that the criminal justice system all of a sudden became fair and equitable and a just system? It didn't happen.
Not at all.
It is still to this day, to this very day, a racist system. All right, those are conclusory remarks. They mean nothing. We're going to give folks the facts. Okay? We're going to give people the facts. All right. So we will now, let's jump forward. So what we just talked about took us from slavery to Jim Crow with the Black Code laws and into the 70s where the Jim Crow Black Code laws were still in existence. So now let's come into the 80s and we'll talk about something called the war on drugs. The war on drugs. I'm going to put up something on the screen here. I hope we're not having audio issues with it. If so, I'll try to fix it. The war on drugs. Let me see. All right. Okay, so I think they have audio here. The war on drugs. The racist war on drugs was launched by Nixon and championed by these former GOP presidents. So the first president to formally launch the so-called war on drugs was Richard Nixon. And then Reagan, Bush, Gerald Ford, and we're going to talk about even a Democrat president who took the war on drugs to another level. So let's talk about this for a minute before we talk about the Democrat president who also absolutely implemented this racist war on drugs.
Yeah, so starting with President Nixon in 1969, President Nixon held a special message to Congress, and he identified drug abuse as, quote, a serious national threat. And he called for a national anti-drug policy at the state and federal level. So this is kind of the first time that this war on drugs um, sentiment started in the late 1960s. A couple years later, Nixon officially declares a, quote, war on drugs. So this is not just a term that activists have made up or people interested in justice. This was a term that was coined by President Nixon at that time, an
That's right.
official war on drugs.
Yep.
And he identified drug abuse as, quote, public enemy number one. So this was a targeted effort to declare this war on drugs. And we know what we're going to get into what that led to. A couple years later, Nixon created the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. So this all occurred within the span of 4 years. this national war on drugs, he created the DEA to coordinate all of the efforts, etc. Then we get into President Jimmy Carter. And President Carter, he wanted to decriminalize marijuana. He was the one president in that time, from President Nixon to President Clinton, where he wanted to criminalize marijuana. I mean, decriminalize marijuana, loosen some of the federal criminal penalties. But obviously, he was a one-term president. A lot of people were against that, and Ronald Reagan came next. And we saw what happened once Ronald Reagan came into office, and the effect that this disastrous war of drugs had on Black people. So, this so-called war on drugs led to federal laws that harshly penalized drug offenses and unjustly targeted at Black people. And the way that different drugs were categorized on the federal level, take for example crack versus cocaine, determined the type of sentence that a person would get. And we know that the government introduced crack into the Black community, and people convicted of possession of crack or selling crack faced much harsher penalties than cocaine. And because the crack was introduced into the Black community, most of the users of crack were Black people. So they were the ones that suffered these harsh penalties. And that is why Michelle Alexander um, came up with the new Jim Crow, because that's exactly what it was.
All right. Now, okay. So, Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, who was at one time considered the first Black president. Bill Clinton signed into law the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, now commonly referred to as the 1994 Crime Bill. And our commenters, the legal rebels, they already know where we're headed with this. Sean, for example, he says, Sean says mass incarceration. Oh, I can't tell you how accurate you are, Mr. Breezy. Mass incarceration followed, especially after Bill Clinton signed this bill into law, the 1994 Crime Bill. Mass incarceration shot through the roof. Now, Chloe, because I'm a little older, I can remember some things that you weren't even thought of yet.
I was born at this point in 1994.
Well, yeah, but I'm gonna go back a few years.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna go back even before I met your mom.
Mm.
Okay. All right. So, crack cocaine. I remember when it hit the country. And as you pointed out, a lot of folks probably missed what you said. Crack cocaine was introduced in our community by the government. The United States government introduced crack cocaine in our community. I actually saw an ex-government administration official admit it on Nightline. He admitted it. And Nixon is also on record as saying that's the way you sort of fight the progress of the Black community. You use drugs. You use the war on drugs. You used the word earlier, evil. Man, I so agree with you. Isn't it evil to introduce drugs in a vulnerable population's community and then launch a war on the drugs that you introduced? Isn't that evil?
Mm-hmm.
And then use that to accomplish exactly what Mr. Breezy said, and that's mass incarceration. Now, Crack cocaine. For those who are old as I am or a little bit, maybe a little younger, we remember how crack cocaine decimated the black community. I lost siblings during that era. I know all about that. Okay? I know all about crack cocaine. And it was horrible. A lot of young blacks were dying. The community was being decimated by this powerful, evil, demonic drug. And something had to be done about it. But Chloe, you know what they did? They did what they always have done to black folks. They criminalized what was really an addiction. They criminalized what today is considered a sickness, a disease. Right? I saw the transformation of how the criminal justice system deals with crack cocaine versus opioid in my practice. I've been practicing law about 15 years. When I first started, crack cocaine, you go to jail. I mean, it's punitive. Don't worry about you're not getting no treatment. You're going to jail, especially if you sold any of it. But then I noticed maybe a decade later when heroin and opioids started afflicting whites, it then started becoming more treatment-based. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is flat out racism. Because when the addicts were black and brown and poor, they went to prison. When the addicts are white, they go to treatment. And blacks became addicts because of the drugs that the government introduced into our communities, into our neighborhoods, literally. Okay? Now,
can I go a little bit deeper on that point?
Absolutely.
About the government introducing drugs into our community, because there was a huge 1996 article that was written by the San Jose Mercury News that linked the CIA's Contra Army to the crack cocaine epidemic in Los Angeles. And
That is
based
right.
on this year-long investigation, it was found that during the 1980s, the CIA helped finance its covert war against Nicaragua's leftist government by selling cocaine to South Central LA drug dealer Ricky Ross,
That is
which
right.
which rapper Rick Ross is named after, by the way. And so, in order for the CIA to finance its operations and war against Nicaragua,
By the
it's
way,
sold cocaine.
keep your thought. But isn't that sort of sick on its own? I mean, a rapper named himself after one of the biggest drug dealers who was responsible for bringing tons of crack cocaine in the black community. And here this rapper has glamorized and idolized this drug dealer.
Yep, and gets a lot of support.
All right.
A lot of support.
Okay. I just threw
And
that in.
so it was just it was written in this investigation that, quote, the CIA's drug network opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, a city now known as the crack capital of the world. And black gangs used their profits to buy automatic weapons, sometimes from one of the CIA linked drug dealers. I mean, that is absolutely astounding. And what is also astounding is that a lot of black people, they disputed this reporting and they didn't want to hear it. But this was what was established.
It's what happened.
What happened?
So that era, the government bringing it in through blacks and then launching a war on blacks resulted in mass incarceration, And
Yep.
here I want to put up a graph that shows you how horrible this mass incarceration was. So if we look here at the bottom of this graph, in 19 up until about 1978, that was probably during the heroin addiction era. 1982, this graph starts going up. That was about the time crack cocaine came into the on the scene. 1986 was about the time that, let me see, I think George Bush was president. I think Clinton was, I got my numbers wrong. I can't remember. Clinton, let me see. Reagan was president in the 80s, then Bush in the early 90s, and then Bill Clinton, I think, throughout the 90s.
92?
I think, somewhere along there. That's been such a long time ago. But the point is, you see mass incarceration increase exponentially starting around 1986, 1990. Someone said Clinton was president from 1992 to 2000. Okay, that helps a lot. So right after he signed in 94, after he signed that crime bill, then we see here. In other words, mass incarceration is directly correlated to the war on drugs.
Which, by the way, that crime bill, President Biden voted for it. So let's put that out there too.
Oh, wow.
We have a Democrat in. Yeah.
Okay. Let's just throw it out there.
Let's throw it out there.
He did. He absolutely did. Now,
Yeah.
okay, so mass incarceration. So the question becomes then, what percentage of black folks make up this mass incarceration? Hold on. I have something prepared to show that, but I don't see it right now. So go ahead, Chloe, and let me see if I can pull that in.
Well, according to Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, this mass incarceration, prison inmates grew from around 300,000 to over 2 million in less than 30 years. And that's that steep incline that you all are seeing on the screen on that graph. And the NAACP obtained stats. And listen to this, guys. Although black people make up only 13.4% of the US population, they make up 22%. We make up 22% of fatal police shootings, 47% of wrongful conviction exonerations, 35% of executions by the death penalty, and 38% of the prison population. Let me say that again. Although black people make up only 13% of the US population, we're half of the wrongful conviction exonerations, half of the people who are found innocent after a wrongful conviction, 1/3 of the death penalty executions, and 38% of the prison population. So that means that even though we're only about a little over 10% of the US population, we're 1/3 of the prison population. That is, that is mind-blowing, the numbers. It is astounding. And we're also 1/3 of death penalty executions killed by the state, by the government, sometimes by the federal government. These are the numbers, that we're talking about. There's large disparity between our numbers as a part of the population versus the wrongful convictions and the prison population. Mm,
It's sad.
it's sad.
All right. Now, hopefully, I got this where I can show it because it's it's even more effective, when people can hear it and see it. Okay. In state prisons, blacks incarcerated 5 times the rate of whites. 1 in 3 African American men will serve time in prison if current trends continue.
Mm, mm,
Okay, that's what you're talking about.
yep.
So, for anyone who says that the criminal justice system isn't racist, are not looking at the numbers.
And Michelle Alexander says in her book, the New Jim Crow, which we both recommend that everyone listen to read this book. Everyone read this book. In fact, I just had a friend who's a lawyer. She's Asian American. She just bought this book, The New Jim Crow, and she is diving into it and reading it. But Michelle Alexander says, quote, sociologists have frequently observed that governments use punishment primarily as a tool of social control, and thus the extent of or severity of punishment is often unrelated to actual crime patterns. So what she's saying there is the government use punishment, prisons, jails to control its population. In that how severe a punishment is, a prison sentence is, a jail sentence is unrelated to the actual crime. So let's go back to Jussie Smollett. So nonviolent offense, filing some false police reports. He gets 5 months in jail versus probation. That's what she's pointing out. Those are the two justice systems that we're talking about and that we're analyzing in this video. So instead of him getting keeping his community service in exchange for his charges to be dropped, he gets prison time. And so what she's saying is the government typically uses that to control it, to control the population.
And that's right. And
Wow.
we have, Chloe, I'll speak for me. We use the Jussie Smollett case to make these comments, to be the opener, to grab attention. But truthfully, this is not really about Jussie Smollett. Whatever one's opinion is about what he did is okay. I think what he did too was just he made some bad choices, and those choices have really affected his life more than anybody else. Because he's now a convicted felon. So, he really messed up. But as you said, the question we're asking, we're looking at the system. We're not looking at his cases. We're looking at, would he have even been prosecuted? And if so, would he have been sent to jail if he was white? And we're given evidence that he likely would not have. He likely would not have. Now, I do happen to have now the slide that you were discussing there just a minute ago, and I want people to see it. I believe it's this one. How many prisoners are black? 38.3% of the prison population are black, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, although blacks make up only 13% of total population. That, Chloe, is almost 3 times, almost 3 times the percentage of the black population in this country. 38%, 38.3%, whereas we only make up like 13%. 13 times 3 is 39%. So that's just a little bit shy of being 3 times the rate of blacks who are incarcerated and compared to the number of blacks in this country. That is flat out racism. Unless you try to make the argument that of all the people in the country, blacks have a predisposition for crime, that we, in other words, we have a crime gene, a criminal gene. I mean, that's the only way you can justify that, those numbers being that skewed.
A lot of people believe that, though.
I know it, but it's
A lot.
it's a racist notion. Black folks who believe, a lot of black folks even believe it. That would be an ignorant notion, and it's just not true. This is systematic. This is not because black folks. I've read research. I think the professor's name is Orlando Patterson, a Harvard professor, who shows that black Americans, even black Americans living in the inner city, are by and large law-abiding, hardworking people. I wrote in my own book, okay, Education and Justice, that I used the research to show that although, for example, black males are kicked out of school, they're expelled, and all of that disproportionately, the numbers show that black male students in public schools do not misbehave disproportionately. People try to say, because these numbers are so skewed, that our kids misbehave more than other kids and our men are more criminally disposed than other people. It is not true. The numbers, the data does not support it. That is a racist notion. The data doesn't support it. No more than the data supports the notion that black people have smaller brains than white people. It's all the creation of a white society that has been extremely racist toward African Americans.
I completely agree with that. I do think, though, we have to bring in some of the culture that has been introduced by rappers and by the white label owners who own the labels that puts out this music, by independent artists and independent rappers. How do we get this perception? If we know the numbers don't verify the fact that we have a crime gene, or we commit more crimes than other races of people, where does this perception come from? We know it's the media, which oftentimes is racist, and it's also some people in our own communities, like the rappers as well, who put this notion out there, who put this gangster culture out there. And look, I love hip hop just like the next person. I'm not sitting here just judging people, but we have to take some of our own actions into accountability as well. What leads to this perception that black culture is more violent than other cultures?
All right. Before we go down that road, let me just highlight a couple of comments that have been made. Nuvi said something that I think is humorous, but it has a very good point. Nuvi says, "I'd like to congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs." Laugh out loud. Your mom said 66%, and this kind of goes to what you were just getting ready to say. 66% of crack users are white or Hispanics, but blacks are charged and arrested more often. So this notion of whether it's more community, whether it's racism or cultural, whether it's white racism versus black culture, is yes, it's a legitimate area of for discussion, for discourse, no question about it. And I agree with you that there are certainly things to be that need to be changed in black culture. The point I would make is the media is guilty, very guilty, of highlighting the parts of our culture that are negative. And the rappers to lace their pockets, and I'll name one, 50 Cent. 50 Cent is not only a rapper who has made a lot of money from this whole so-called gangster rap or whatever, but he's also producing a lot of television content that feeds the notion that the black community is largely gangsterized. Okay? And it's just simply not true. You have, as we just read, you have most of the crack addicts are white and or Hispanic. Most African Americans, the overwhelming majority of African Americans, are hardworking, law-abiding citizens. You have that subculture, that you're talking about, that gets all the attention. And they're the ones all over TV, all over YouTube, all over TikTok, all over Instagram, that are making all of us look a certain way. Now, that culture, that subculture, if you will, that subculture, absolutely, a lot of changes need to be made. But the larger African American culture, church-going people, family-oriented people, but they deal with this. Our culture deals with a lot of poverty, a lot of systemic racism, a lot of high unemployment, a lot of broken schools. I mean, all sorts of issues that we contend with as a race of people every day. So some of it is culture, but most of it is racism, media bias, perception, etc.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm so glad, especially you as a young person, for opening that up, okay? Because it's a conversation that needs to be had, and you know, I agree with you. I'm your father. We've raised you to be a law-abiding, good citizen, not to get into all of that.
Now, don't get me wrong. I like power, and I I love the I love, not love, but I will watch a power. I will watch other crime shows like that. So I get the allure of it. I'll watch a Narcos. But I do think celebrity and media, they need to take into account the perception that they are putting into minds here in the United States and across the world about what African Americans and what black people are like, that are not the truth. And they should take some accountability into that. Because there's not a lot of people who can separate, okay, this is fantasy, this is for entertainment purposes, this is glamorized, versus this is what black culture is actually like. So they have to take accountability into that as well. But I hear a lot of celebrities say, well, look, it's up to the parent to parent their children. I'm just putting out my art form. This is just entertainment. But because a lot of these late record labels, television state television stations are owned by whites, and money is king, then I believe that black celebrities need to take more ownership in the type of content that is being put out.
Sean Breezy said, I heard a guy say it's more African American men in jail than all women in jail in the world. Wow. Wow.
Mm.
I'm going to come back to what you just said, Chloe. Nuvi says today, but what about the decades prior? The problem started then, and then the single mothers raising children today. Even if the targeting was corrected, the damage is done and will domino. All right, two great comments from our audience.
Thank you for your comments.
Absolutely. Let me say, and it sort of ties in with this, that the record labels, the movie producers, they're going to put out the content they think people want,
Hmm.
right? What's the old debate? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? You in this case, the record producers, the television movie producers and executives, they are not going to invest their money to make these TV series and movies and music unless there's a demand for it and an appetite for it and a thirst for it. I just happen to believe that that thirst comes largely from a subculture. Okay? Some of this gut, bucket, bottom content that we're seeing, it's a certain group of people in our community, right? It's not the larger community. Can you comment on what Nuvi says here?
What does it say?
You can't read it. It
Mm-mm.
said, okay, let me read it for you again. Today, but what about the decades prior? The problem started then, and then the single mothers raising children today. Even if the targeting was corrected, the damage is done and will domino. I think what Nuvi is actually saying is that, are we putting too much blame? I think Nuvi's kind of tying into what you're saying and sort of agree with you and me for that matter, that even if we corrected the racial profiling and the racism, et cetera, even if we were to correct that, damage has been done. For example, single black mothers, 75% of black babies are born to single black mothers. So with those sort of statistics, with that happening, even if we address the racism at this point, would that really help the black community?
Yes. I appreciate the comment, Nuvi. I don't agree with it. I'm more of a optimistic type person. I agree in some aspects in terms of there is some things that the black community we need to look internally for and to change on our own. But even with single mothers, black women are leading the black community in education and opening businesses. Um, Black women are leading, as of right now, the black community in being entrepreneurs. And so, because so many black children are being raised in single parent homes, I don't think that that necessarily means that that child is not empowered to succeed and cannot succeed. Because let's keep it real, we do live in America, and we do live in a country where, even with the racism that we're attempting to address, even with the disparities in this country, um, we have the opportunity to be successful and to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And I know a lot of people who were raised in single parent homes, or a lot of people who were raised in poverty, and not in the best conditions, who, despite the racism that we're talking about, despite the inequity, have been able to provide um, a successful life for themselves and for their families. So I don't think that everything is done now. I don't The dominoes may be set, but we can put the dominoes back up. That would
Okay.
be my response.
Nuvi said, my comment makes more sense in context of the prior comments. Not sure if you're seeing them.
Mm,
I mean, these are great comments.
yes.
Great comments. All right.
Okay, I see here.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I see here one comment that Nuvi made. Like when you punish stereotypically black drugs more harshly, you separate young children from their fathers, which leads them into criminal lifestyles, which feeds the problem for the next generation. I think that that's true. That is very true.
Yeah, and I think Nuvi is
So,
saying when you connect that comment with the later comments, it all sort of makes more sense when Nuvi talks about single mothers.
mm, um, I believe that there is a connection because the harsher penalties that crack cocaine has, and black men being convicted at a higher rate for these drug possessions and etc. I don't believe that everything is set in stone now. I think that things can change, and with more people getting more knowledge and knowing how racism starts, and just having knowledge in general, in education, that everything is not set in stone quite. I don't think it's set in stone now. I hope my answer makes sense.
Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring them both together because I agree with both of you. I think I think Nuvi makes a great point by pointing out that um, when the system, as we're pointing out, is so racist, skewed against, and biased, and punitive, and mean spirited toward black men, you're going to separate a lot of black men from their children, whether they are
Yep.
married to the mothers or not. There's going to be a lot of separation. I heard somebody say one time that when you send a black man to prison, you're sending a family to prison because his children, are basically serving time with him. So I agree with Nuvi when with the comment that what we're exactly pointing out is the ramification on the black family, right? This
Yep.
mass incarceration has resulted in a lot of black children being raised without their fathers, a lot of them. Okay, so you look at. Let's go back to this screen right here. When you look at this screen here and see the exponential increase of mass incarceration, you will also likewise see an exponential increase of single parent families, black women raising children. And then Nuvi makes the point that now those children, now those children have grown up without their father, and here they go now, repeating that cycle,
Yeah.
repeating that cycle. And so Nuvi then asked the question, even if we interrupt this cycle and system, is it still going to result in bad outcomes because it's been in place for so long? And I think you're saying not necessarily. It's not set in stone. We can and we must do everything we can to try and and correct this in the black community. We can step in the community, the neighborhoods, the churches, the sororities, the fraternities, the businesses, the schools can all step in. That's part of what I talk about in my book about how schools can help a lot of these kids, and are doing a bad job of it. So I agree with you, Chloe, that we can and we must find solutions to this. And isn't that a beautiful segue into the final section of the show today, where we're going to talk a little bit about solutions?
Yes. And thank
Absolutely.
you so much for those comments, Nuvi, and the question as well.
Yes. And
You like these type of dialogue.
absolutely. That's part of the fun of doing this.
Yeah.
Um, so why do we do this? Here's why we do this. I'm going to put something on the screen. This is what a client wrote to us recently. As you see, it says 16 hours ago. And this says, God was with them and me. My life was in their hands. They took care of me. If I could give them 100 stars, I would. That is what this is all about. This gentleman was in the throes of the legal system. And by the way, we're not disclosing any sort of attorney-client confidentiality information. All of this is public record. But this gentleman, this fine gentleman, who happened to be a serviceman, a veteran, who served his nation, found himself in the criminal justice system. And we fought hard for him. And when he says God was with us, he's absolutely right. And one way God was with us in a big way is God gave us a fair prosecutor. Now, when you get a fair prosecutor as a criminal defense lawyer, you have to acknowledge them. Okay? You have to say, thank God. Because prosecutors are very powerful in the criminal justice system. That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. But we had a fair-minded prosecutor who didn't do anything for us and for our client that the prosecutor wouldn't have done in any other case. All right? So I'm not saying prosecutor was, just overly fair and all that. No, I'm just saying the prosecutor just did exactly what used to be a prosecutor, Chloe. And you know that when you were a prosecutor, and prosecutors today should do one thing, and that is seek justice, wherever that leads them. And in this case, justice was to have this case dismissed by a grand jury. And that's what happened. And so now this man is able to move on with his life. This African-American man whose life was hanging in the balance had he been convicted of this charge. Okay?
Yeah.
This is why we do it. And again, as you can see, he says, my life was in their hands. Really was in God's hands. But God was using us. He's making the point that he was in a very, very precarious situation. And I really appreciate him saying, if I could give not only 5 stars, I'd give him 100 stars. But we give all the praise to the Lord. But this is what it's all about, and this is why we fight this system. This is why we fight this system.
Yeah. And it's a system, and fighting the system can be tiring, guys. Fighting the system, um, it can take a lot out of you. But when we get reviews like this and we know the impact that we can have truly on someone's life, it makes all of that worth it. It makes it so worth it.
Yeah, I think what
And
you're saying is some of our clients, we work like crazy trying to fight for them, and they don't appreciate it. They in fact oftentimes end up attacking us,
yeah,
and so on. Although it should be pretty obvious that we take this really seriously, but you're right, Chloe. We just have to
yeah, and
overlook
we
that
care.
crowd and keep fighting.
Yep, yep. So for him to acknowledge that meant a lot to us.
So as we come to a close, the thing I do want to, as a solution that I want to stress that we need to do as a community where the criminal justice system is when we talk about the criminal justice system, is vote. Vote. Why is voting so important? Number one, the DA in most jurisdictions are elected. The mayor is an elected official who oftentimes hire the police chief. Let me see. The sheriff is elected. The legislators are elected who enact these laws, who criminalize everything, who know how to use these statutes to target black people. Somebody say, "Oh, that doesn't happen." I don't know what you're talking about. I live in Texas. This is a crimson red state. The GOP is strong here. They just passed anti-critical race theory laws. They just passed voter suppression laws here. Don't tell me they can't. Voting. Not only for the president, but especially for the local authorities. Because again, those are the ones who have a great deal of impact on our lives on a daily basis, Chloe.
Yep. And I mean, the district attorneys, judges, sheriffs, so many of these people touch our lives in so many ways. And in order to get these changes, we've needed politicians to change them. Um, we needed politicians in the U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1964. We needed politicians to just pass out of the House the Crown Act, which I'm going to make a video about a little bit later. So our votes really do matter, guys. And look, politicians, they want to stay in office. So if we contact, you can contact your senator, your congressperson, your state senator, your state congressperson. Let them hear from you. Oftentimes, you can get in touch with their staff. Just tell them, hey, such and such needs to vote on this, or this is what my community is dealing with. Talking to your local city council men and women. This is really how we change these numbers. We change mass incarceration. We change the disparity between black and other races of prison inmates. We change this so-called war on drugs and all of that. Get in touch with these local politicians who have direct impact on our lives and letting them hear from your voice and telling your family and friends about it as well. Letting people know, hey, this bill is going to be on the docket. Take a look into this. Take a look into such and such. That's truly how we'll change all of these dire statistics as well.
Very good. We got Derry, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and if I'm seeing it correctly, Derry, my employee, Derry employee. It's either Derry or Danny employee. And this person says, I'm watching from Brussels in Belgium, Europe. And well, first of all, welcome and thank you for tuning in. And you're coming in kind of late. We're getting ready to end, but we'll be back next Saturday at 2 p.m. Our commitment is to be here every Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. So hopefully, Derry, you can catch us next time and get more of the show. But thank you for tuning in, and thank you for this comment. And Derry asks, do you think creating a fund to finance the education of young black students, because poverty is very expensive, because the university, is very expensive in the U.S.? Well, sure. Anything that we can do to help more young black students attend the university would be a very positive thing, as well as forgiving student loans, which more black students than other students tend to use student loans to go to prison, and that's because of the wealth disparities in this country. We are talking about a country where the average white family has 8 to 10 times more wealth than the average black family, and so there's not as much disposable wealth to use toward education. So some help with the student loans, Joe Biden, some help with the student loans would be very, very, very appreciated, like you promised on the campaign trail, by the way.
Yep.
So yes, anything to help get more African-American youth in college would be a great thing. So yes, thank you very much for that, Derry. And thank you, all of you, for your comments. A Chief says, hello, Miss Corbett. Absolutely.
What's up? I don't know if you're talking about my mom, who has been such a blessing and a help with our broadcast, with interacting with the viewers and asking such amazing questions.
This is Miss Corbett, not Mrs.
Okay,
Corbett, so I'm assuming it's you.
Well, hey there.
Either way, right? Thank you so
Either
much.
way.
Yeah, thank you, A Chief. So yeah, I think we got in all the comments. I think we said all we wanted to say. The conclusion of the matter is, yes, there is tremendous racism in the criminal justice system that started way back, even before the 13th Amendment. Our point with the 13th Amendment is it still opened the door for a whole lot of the shenanigans that we see today in the criminal justice system. And then, the Black Code, the vagrancy laws, and then the war on drugs, and now the crack versus powder cocaine, the legalization of marijuana that whites are using to make millions while blacks continue to get prosecuted for. The difference in how the opioid addiction is handled versus how the crack epidemic was handled, okay? So, look, we're looking at all of that, the racial profiling of the police department. All of that makes for a very, very racist criminal justice system. And Chloe and I are in there every day, fighting this system for our clients. Thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you very much. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Like and share. Like and share. Am I saying it right, Chloe? Like and share?
Saying it perfectly.
Okay.
Like, comment, and share.
Like, comment, and share. That's the thing we want you to do. All right. So with that said, we are out of here. You all be good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.